Pray for our troops and for all who may be in harm's way these days. Be with those who are not with us today, but listening, and to those who are here, and to Jane, who shares her time and thoughts with us today. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you to Ellen and Willie. There you are. Couldn't find you hiding over there for the refreshments today. We have all kinds of good things, and you'll notice a little St. Patrick's Day touch to it, and that's always good too. So thank you very much, ladies. A couple things. First of all, the WOC luncheon on the 23rd. The postcards with all the information I have left back on the sign-in table. And I checked with Holly, and they still have room for more people. So if you have not made a reservation and are thinking about it or whatever, why grab a card and before you leave, and we'll tell you how to go about it. Jean, anything else you'd like to say?
And men are always welcome at the luncheon.
Absolutely.
Just because it's women in the church doesn't have to be just women. We would love to have some men.
And bring a guest.
Well, sign up.
Bring a guest.
There you go, and bring a guest.
Yes, yes. And the food is good, in addition to good speakers. And so anyway, there's that. Also back on the sign-up table, I have put a directory, and it's open to Literature Circle. And I know it's hard to believe. It seems like yesterday I passed out the new directories. And here we are getting ready for another new directory. And they're asking that we get any corrections made in March. So I put that out. You may be very familiar with what's there. It may have been there forever. Somebody may have moved. Change in phone, email, any change that you would like in the directory. Go back and make the correction in that directory. And we'll pick it up and get it, so you have it correctly in the new directory. Okay, any questions on that, anything? Okay, very good, very good. I think that pretty much covers the things that I had. Does anybody else have anything? Okay, well, it's just nice to see you all here today, by the way. And we'll move right on to Jane, who's hiding over here in the corner. Jane Hansen, I don't know that she needs any introduction at all. I don't know if there's anyone here, but there may be that has not heard her before. But she's been doing this forever. She always has March, the month of March, because it is the Tuesday afternoon of her spring break that she shares with us. Hopefully, happily, and we certainly enjoy having her. And I believe from my calculations, Jane, that it's around 30 years now that you've been teaching.
Wow.
She teaches English at San Antonio College, and she's been around San Antonio for a long time. She's a graduate of Thomas Jefferson High School. But one thing which was a whole new thing to me, but maybe not to all of you, she spent many summers on the stage crew for the First Pres theater productions. So there you go, another little fact to put in your mind there. So without further ado, Jane, I'm turning it over to you.
You know, Ann Presley was my best buddy, so it was hard not to participate. And she got my husband to participate, so we had a really good time with the spotlight and whatever else we ended up doing when Annie was the play. A lot of kid wrangling, a lot of little girls. It was a lot of fun, a lot of fun. Today's book is The Librarian of Malo, and I thought I was choosing a sort of different book. I kind of got stuck on spy novels and librarian novels, word novels are really my forte. And I thought this would be different because it was an international writer. There would be a very distinctly different perspective. I would learn something new. I did learn something new, many some things. But it's also very much in the librarian, spy, resistance kind of novel. And I guess the third time I read it, it dawned on me that it begins in 1939, about 8 months before my mom graduates high school. And so maybe what I was trying to do is put myself in the mind of somebody young and new at life, really, and the perceptions of what's going on with World War II. And this writer is really interesting to me. Born 1971, he lives in Madrid. There's very little about his early life on his biography. There's some general information, makes him pretty fascinating. He has a master's degree in modern history. He studied church history. He says he is a Protestant, an evangelistic Protestant. So he looks at the struggle of sectarian groups, in particular the discovery and colonization of the Americas, fallout from the Holocaust, the atomic bomb, the Inquisition, and he has essays on famous people like Steve Jobs, Martin Luther King Jr., and so on, Pope Francis. His most recent publication, the one I could find recently, was in the Writer's Digest, 5 tips for writing about real-life heroes in historical fiction. And so that's really the basis of his novel. He's writing about real things that happen to real people, but he's guising it in created characters. He says that literature frees us from the chains of extremes like angry payback and brings us to a higher state in which true heroism dwells. Other book reviewers say he specializes in the lives of unorthodox Spaniards and Americans. From his age, he grew up mostly under the 1978 Constitution in Spain, so at a time when the monarchy is returning and also establishing democratic processes in the country. Madrid is a much more traditional Spanish city than, say, Barcelona. I'm not sure if there is a lot of language concern in Madrid, but I don't really think that's what Escobar is worried about. He says he is most concerned with love, revenge, conscience, guilt, and how the past traps us and shapes our lives. And he decides to write this book, or a story about Malo, from visiting in 2018, and also recalling some conversations he had with folks who had lived through the Spanish Civil War, the influence of Franco, and he found the grit of individuals very similar. And so he determines that he wants to look at letters, because that is a very popular media during the time, easy to mail, maybe not easy to hide. A lot of ordinary librarians working at keeping materials available. The epistolary nature of the book, it starts with letters, and letters off and on. Some of them are extraordinarily philosophical. And it demonstrates that this particular writer understands how to grab an audience. He makes his character write to a writer, and she's trying as a librarian to preserve knowledge in time of peril. And so we begin in August 1939 in France, in a historic port on the English Channel at the South End. It has a strong history of piracy, which is kind of fun to read about. And it's also a ferry terminal for Jersey and Guernsey. So it's towards the south of France. It is definitely Brittany, and the Breton people actually speak a different kind of French, which is, I guess, not unlike what happens in Barcelona with Catalan. It's also an ancient Western Roman site, and you can find 4th century Saxon shore. There's a fort there. You can cite that out as well. So the whole structure is built on history and near history. And we focus on the story of Jocelyn and Antoine Ferric and the Nazi occupation of Brittany, passive resistance, of course, a ruthless German commander, the burning and repression of books because they're considered unsuitable. They are either burnt or stolen, and that represents a great deal of loss of knowledge. Our librarian Jocelyn manages to hide books and sustain some community services during her husband's military service, his time as a POW and in recuperation. She is sort of described as an ordinary character, but I think when you read the book, you see that her purpose is anything but ordinary. And I think maybe it's my generation focusing on some pretty extraordinary circumstances during World War II. You know, for me, if my dad hadn't done what he did and managed to live through all of it, I wouldn't be here. So, thanks, Dad. But how many other people did the same thing? How many other people didn't live through the war, but their children did? How much of that grit are we able to sustain in our own lives? And the very first passage in the book is a prologue written to the author, Marcel Zola, an ideal. And Jocelyn writes, "Time takes care with no one. It weighs us down, bowing our backs to humiliate us. It shows our stride into insecure, hesitating steps. We start out running, but gradually get to the point where we can't even walk without holding on to something. After health and beauty have left us little by little, it steals away everything we care about, all that really matters, the people we love, then our friends and family, and lastly, if we manage to live long enough, our own children." And so she goes on to write that no one can beat the god of time. But also, she says she is an ardent fan of books, and she says to Mr. Zola, "I weep at the misfortune of your characters and Gabrielle's terrible illness, but now I'm living my version of it, France's very own play." And so even her early letter sets the foreshadowing of her own life. She suffers from tuberculosis. I think certainly my generation is been very advantaged by immunizations. I remember my grandmother being really happy that I could get a polio vaccine. And I suspect it's one of the reasons she and my grandfather only had my mom. They felt like they could keep one child alive. And so my mom never learned to swim. My grandmother would not let her get in a body of water for fear that she would contract polio. And my mom had a cousin who did. So the family was really aware of that. And the description in the book about tuberculosis is medically right on. It is one of those things at the time we have a difficulty in curing. You want to remember that penicillin is used as an experimental drug on war wounded, and it's after that that we take full advantage of that as a cure-all almost variety of disease. And so her prologue kind of presents a good context. It tidies up a little bit about background, I guess, and certainly political ideas that people don't really think are political at the time. And in the honeymoon chapter, they go off to Paris, and they have a lovely time for a while. They walk along the Seine. They look at the book-stalls, if you've been there, but there's book-stalls there, some of which are full books, some just the illustrations from maybe a 17th century book. Apparently Paris has had these stalls off and on since the 16th century for resale of books, which is a really interesting historical perspective. I'm not sure we're as enthusiastic about resale on our books. or the images therein, but it helps establish a pretty long history of art, philosophical approaches, ideology, and so on. We find that Jocelyn, as a librarian, not only has these beautiful moments with her husband, but she faces all the larger questions of life, faith, commitment, philosophy, what happens when people are abused, misused, and it causes a great deal of reflection in the character, but I think for the reader, that also occurs along the way. And the second chapter, you pretty much face everything about human life. Sorry. Chapter 2 is called Death and Grace. She writes, back at home, I stopped in front of the pastry shop and admired the delicacies in the window. I bought a few and on my way home devoured one. The taste delighted and distracted me for a passing moment. Then I dragged myself up the stairs, fighting for every breath and hoping Antoine was already home so he could sit by the window and read. Books lightened the pain in my soul and stood guard before the advancing embrace of death. The cloth-bound cardboard covers made me invulnerable and immortal, like the characters on the pages within. And so she's relying on her book experiences while she tries to live through tuberculosis. And for a time, she believes that she's just not going to make it. Nonetheless, she pushes herself, and her husband pushes her to. He tells her, "Just don't leave me. You have to stay alive." And I think sometimes when you read stories like this, the circumstances become really difficult, and I would close the book and put it down. I had a hard time doing that. I wanted to make sure that there was some transition that occurred before I could put the book down for a brief period of time. And I don't find a lot of comfort necessarily in the book, but more and more about grit, about the ways that the great generations, both in the U.S. and in Europe, really sustained their efforts, even as underdogs. And the idea of, at every turn, the chapter's going to remind you that there's nothing easy. You're going to read bombs, you're going to read letters from the road, you're going to discover what the resistance is all about. You're going to witness those privations. People are going to go hungry, and you're going to feel hungry when you read the descriptions, and I think that's a sign of a really complete kind of writer. But then you want to think, with his background in history, why would he make up an alternative for us? And then finally, he reflects a good bit of rebellion, which I think is pretty helpful. It makes you feel like you can sustain the read, right? You can't stop because you can't give up on these individuals. When she comes home, or when she's at home and she's suffering from tuberculosis, and her husband tries to get her help, she writes, "The only thing tethering me to life was Antoine's hand. One flesh that desires and responds to another has no need of vision to recognize the beloved." She, again, is trying to sustain her life by holding on to another, her beloved. And then the next few chapters describe all the privations that occur when there's an opportunity with friends to have a great meal, but there's not a lot of food left. Everybody comes over and borrows nicer clothing, dresses up, has a meal, tries to put what's going on out of doors, out of mind. And at dinner, they have a very interesting conversation. Heroism, as most men understand it, is risking one's life with courage and sacrifice to gain a position, trap enemies, or save a wounded companion. heroes seek glory, but just a few hours ago, I saw this woman here run out between the German bullets to save a woman and her 2 young children. She couldn't save the mother, and one of the children died in her arms. She wasn't playing at war. Women aspire to something higher. They aspire to bring men into the world, educate them, and set them free. And so, even at dinner, when they're trying to leave what's happening out of doors behind them for just a moment, there's no way to do that. And then a continuing series of letters from her husband as he tries to describe the chaos that surrounds him. Dear Jocelyn, soldiers and officers are deserting, and there's hardly ever a break from German offense. It's as though they're possessed with the spirit of attacking, which we certainly do not have. We've only been in combat for a few days, but morale is already low. The British are falling back, equally as uninterested in fighting as we are. The Belgians are still trying to wrap their heads around how their country was reduced to nothing in a matter of days. There are very few Dutch soldiers, and most have surrendered to the Germans. And so sometimes these letters don't really sustain the reader very much. It's what happens in reaction with the characters and what she decides she's going to do. So in a not very passive way, even though there is some practicing of passive resistance. The characters in the book, just as the French people in reality were buoyed by the speech of de Gaulle, who in London calls for their resistance. He says, accosted by the power of words does not lie in the stories we tell, but in our ability to connect with the hearts of those who read them. And what de Gaulle has done is, in a very short speech, say, do not give up on resistance. We cannot give up. We will not give up. And so, no matter what kind of self-doubt enters into the characters' minds, when German soldiers take over households and demand good treatment and the best of food, including book purges from private libraries, it becomes more and more real. And I suppose on one level it tells us why even ordinary people who know that their lives are in danger join the resistance. There's a scene where they have the Three Musketeers novel out. So there's a reason for the book club to be meeting. And they're not really talking about the Three Musketeers, but they can jump right in if they are disturbed by unwelcome guests. As usual, I'm going to jump way ahead. There's so many characters and so many twists and turns. I don't want to confuse you about it. It takes time to read the novel, but it's really interesting in a way that a lot of spy novels haven't been. And I think it is because he builds so much on reality of what actually happens to folks in the French resistance. I'm not saying that other people haven't done that, but I guess Escobar has done a job convincing me that these are actually the ways that people are responding. And the idea that just ordinary, everyday, regular people are the ones who take the reins and move forward is really impressive to me. That sounds like problem solving in all the ways that my dad taught me to problem solve. If there's something wrong, we're going to figure out what the thing is, and can we fix it? If we can fix it ourselves, we're going to do it. And that just really suggests a kind of life perspective that's in spite of the sound of jackboots in an apartment complex, or the repression of German commanders who have a very narrow view of what is appropriate for life. Folks really don't give up. And I suppose this particular book on the side of the French resistance is really just another part of telling the story of what's actually going on in World War II and how people in Europe really feel. In terms of the novelist that she writes to throughout the book, what is Marcel Zola like? I had never seen a photograph of him and did not know what he was like in person, but I could intuit his soul from his writings. He's about 50 years old, has gray, almost white hair, a receding hairline, wrinkles all over his white forehead, those small, sneaky eyes that you can tell have seen a lot. He's got a wide smile that fills his cheeks, which are really wide even though he's skinny. He always dresses well but not showy. He's really nice and calm, like he's wrapped up in a big world inside himself. How do you know him so well? He's not a full-time professor, but at the Sorbonne they give him time to give lectures on occasion. And I'm guessing when I saw him first, the room was full of Nazi spies, but no one could accuse him of anything. We all left encouraged and feeling change might be possible. So this is the kind of sort of grit that the author slides in with a variety of characters. I won't lie to you, not all the characters live through the novel, as is appropriate. Sometimes reading novels from the period or reflections on the period, you know, the first important people in the novel always live through it. And I suppose this is a much more realistic reflection about people who disappear and about people who, despite their disappearance, manage to affect a great deal of change in their environment. And so by late summer 1941, the bombings are increasing, and this is where we are introduced to that character in the passage that I just read. And then we're going to skip way forward again to 1944. And Saint Malo has been bombed repeatedly. She writes, Saint Malo is in complete ruins. The customs house destroyed, the port a graveyard for half-sunken ships, the trees of the walkways and parks twisted and splintered, the bus station vaporized, and the houses of Place Chateaubriand burned to the ground. The procession of the wounded and civilians advanced with white flags waving. Prisoners from Fort National saluted them as they passed, while the Germans kept their guns trained on them at all times. A few yards beyond the casino, they crossed the line and came to the territory of the Americans, which I could already see from the library roof. The military medics began tending the people and loading them into Red Cross vehicles. Even from my distance, the citizens' relief was palpable. They were free. The fear and fatigue were over, and the war could eventually become a distant nightmare we had all finally woken up from. I could not keep from crying. I dried my eyes and saw people coming out of the fort. From far off, I could hear voices shouting, "Liberty." The word sounded so strange, and I groped at its meaning. Now I was completely alone to face my fate, the last French woman in Saint Malo. And so she is seeing the development of the end of the war. She goes on a few days later to write, "Everything is made of words. We would not understand a thing without them. They define our feelings, fuel our ideas, and inspire our faith. Without them, the world would be silent. The book of John begins, in the beginning was the Word. Through words, the world was built because something does not actually exist until it has a name. Human beings have been naming things for thousands of years. In naming things, we possess them in a way, make them more human, turn them into extensions of ourselves. We have humanized the gods and animals and have domesticated the world. But these same words can incite the most visceral hatred and unleash desperate passion." That's a lot. So, for a work of fiction, for a work of historical fiction, gonna get a big serving of philosophy, for sure. And definitely of humanity, the good and bad of it, the Nazi hatred of the Bolsheviks, the nasty things done on the way out of town, the limitation of culture because of the burning of books. Toward the end of the book, she writes another letter to Marcel, and then there's a clarification on the historical material for you if you want to take a look at it. She writes, Marcel, I have no idea how the future will judge me. Perhaps my existence will be one more blurry page in a book of life, only mattering to my creator. But if you ever tell the world what happened with the St. Malo library, I hope your readers will forgive me. I'm an ordinary person. I loved, I struggled, I searched for happiness, however torpidly, as one groping in the dark. I gave myself to my books and my husband. I loved my friends and I tried to preserve my city's memory. I didn't succeed. After regaining consciousness at the hospital, Denny told me that Herman had died in the building and I felt guilty. I had somehow drawn him into his final destiny. The doctor told me I couldn't live with the one lung I had left, and I would slowly dwindle until one morning I just wouldn't wake up. Dear Marcel, I hope that all those who have loved and dared to live find themselves reflected in my life. I'm begging you to steal back from the abyss, from the ashes of St. Malo, the words the fire burned away, so that one day people will know that the only power strong enough to change the world is love. So, I did cry a few dozen times in the book. I felt really badly for people, and I think in the other books, not as easily brought to tears. This seemed closer to real people somehow. And so I found it pretty fascinating. If you all have some observations or questions, I'd be happy to help with those. Yes?
Just a comment that the format of having it be letters, as you said in your introduction, I think that's what brings the emotion to it. As you said, I felt that way too, and I feel it's so personal when it's a letter.
Yes. And, you know, we learned to write letters when we were really young kids. You know, the dreaded thank you note to your aunt for the beach towel or whatever. But you know, those things are rare artifacts today. Handwriting, cursive writing is a rare artifact. My students, they hesitate to read cursive writing. They're afraid they'll not understand what it actually says. And so, you know, you can, there are so many documents in cursive. If you can read cursive writing, you can translate those documents, like for the Library of Congress and so on, because folks can't read them anymore. And, you know, I just keep thinking of that Palmer handwriting book I had in fourth grade, and, you know, how if you didn't get the swirls right, you might get in trouble. And I have pretty good handwriting. I'm certain it's not according to Palmer code. But,
Why do you think, why do you think that, I saw this with my children, I mean, they learned cursive, but then they quit using it pretty soon. Why do you think that progression happened?
well, we have these lovely little handhelds now, and I think those of us that grew up holding instruments and using them, whatever they are, we like whatever that comfort is. You know, my husband gets a hole in his pocket, I'm gonna darn it up with some sort of patch, and a lot of folks don't do that, and you know, don't know how to do embroidery or hem a pair of pants or what have you. So they have different digital skills than we do, for sure. And boy, talk about fast texting, I can't go that fast. But there are things, you that we can do, that we're more confident doing. It's just a shift in technology. Eventually, we'll get used to it. But we also have a club at school that's a knitting club, and it's pretty significant. I want to say maybe 25 or 30 students sit and knit, and their blood pressure is way low. And so, there is some return to that. The art guild students sit and draw. They don't maybe talk very much, but they sit and draw together, and you can see, the architecture students, the same thing. They're under a lot more pressure than the rest, I think, but, they're using their hands constantly to build things, to draw things. That's a big difference. This is, that letter faction, I think, is definitely a part of what drew me in. And, just the idea of all these, you can't look at these generations of people who dealt with and lived through somehow, perhaps lived through World War II without considering what they grew up with in very different times. And, seasonal food, unless you were really wealthy, we all ate seasonal food. Remember way back when HEB only had oranges in the winter? And so you didn't have 5 different kinds of oranges. You had oranges from the gallon. So those things are really different.
In the book, they talked about a list of banned books, genres, and she received that, Jocelyn received that list, and so she started going through her collection and saying, these books that they're going to, this year we have extra copies, we're giving back copies, and then they came back and they're like, oh yeah, here's the list, and she goes, that's not the list we had, this is the list we received, and this is what we were going by, and she was so shocked by it. So what did you think about, and I think they also said in the back of the book, how that this was a real list that went out.
Well, I'm still shocked by book bannings. And I don't think my parents were particularly liberal, but they figured if I could check it out of the library, I read on. And if you didn't understand it, you'd probably quit reading it. I feel the same way today. I think that book banning, I certainly think parents should keep an eye on what their kids are reading, but the other part is, it's a book. What's it really going to do except make somebody ask questions? And isn't it ultimately our goal to have good critical thinkers and ask questions? And I see that also as a difference in the classroom. Students hesitate to ask questions. They're afraid that I might get mad at them for pointing out something in the book that I didn't talk about, or whatever. And honestly, they are really intelligent, very focused, but I think hesitate to trust people because they don't know who's on their side. And gosh, if your history class doesn't include the Constitution, that's kind of crazy. I just remember my dad making us read that at home too. Especially when the EPA, the ERA came up and Texas voted for it. And there were long explanations of why that was necessary from my dad. And kind of interesting. It makes you, a book like this makes you reflect on those lessons, the lessons that you might not have had if your World War II hero had made it through, and then the reflection of what they wrought, those who died wrought for us anyway. Makes you think a little differently about the commitment to rebuild anything that's been destroyed, including our thinking ability. That's what makes us human. Why restrict it? I mean, sometimes it is all whimsy. We think crazy things, but that's good in a way. That's where creativity is born. That's how we get green icing on cookies. You know, I begged my mother to dye her hair green when I was a little girl because it was on the color wheel. Today, she might do it. Yes.
Jane, I liked the book, I really did. To me, the difference between this and all the other spy books generally was, it seems like in the others, you're so much centered on the project, on the exact what they're doing. This is way more centered on a character development of the people involved. I think that's why it touched us, is because we got to know them.
Yeah.
We knew exactly what they were thinking. We were in their heads, in their hearts, and that makes it touching.
Yeah.
Whereas just what are they accomplishing? What's the next?
Yeah. What emotions and critical thinking are attached to that kind of commitment, and what parts of that remake their personalities for us? Yeah, I think this is a very gifted writer. He has a lot of books. They're all about.
Have you got time for a couple more comments?
Sure, of course, yeah.
I follow on what Grace just said. I find it admirable when any writer of his stature can divorce himself from emotional detachment to his characters. And that's the only way I can explain some of the things that Jocelyn says. I want to focus on two of them.
Okay.
Because without the author's intent to let his characters be vulnerable, I don't think he would have allowed them to say, or allowed her to say what she said. Just two examples. One is on page 298. Where she encounters the young Jewish girl. Now before that, she has reported to the readers that there are Jews hiding out. She mentions that one time and never refers to them again. But then she encounters this one Jewish girl. I'm going to read this. We're Jews, but don't tell anybody. A lot of people hate us. Don't worry, I said. I won't tell anyone. Do you know what it means to be a Jew? No, I don't. Would you tell me? Don't you know the story of Esther in the Bible? I read it when I was a little girl. Being a Jew means always being afraid, looking behind you to make sure no one's following, keeping your bag packed near the door in case you have to run away, praying in silence on Fridays, and crying for a land you've never seen. Well then, perhaps I'm a Jew. Absurd in the minimum, but there's more. You quoted this passage earlier, and with your knowledge of the author that you shared with us, you helped us understand that not only is he immersed in the history of the church, but you reported that he is a devout Protestant. The only way that Jocelyn can be allowed to say what she says on page 327 is again to expose her vulnerabilities and her, frankly, her ignorance. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not criticizing anybody here. I'm celebrating what the author's done. This is what you read. I'll just read parts of it. Everything is made of words. We would not understand a thing without them. Without them, the world would be in silence. Then we have this. book of John begins, in the beginning was the Word. Well, it ain't about words. It's about Jesus. And it has nothing to do with the written word. But she takes that quote and makes it stupidly into a part of her argument about the importance of words, which cannot be denied. She's a librarian. She's committed and focused on saving these books in this library, which, by the way, never existed. I admire what the author has done to allow the reader to grasp the inconsistencies and the vulnerabilities in a very flawed character, who yet rises above those flaws, whatever you may think of the story, and does this great, admirable thing.
You know, he says he wants to write about regular people in the war, and not just those who suffer from the Holocaust and its effects.
Yeah.
And that lesson of who is Jewish is a profound one.
And he presents the tubercular patient very accurately.
Oh, yes.
If you read the Wild West stories, you read about Doc Holliday and other people who had tuberculosis who became infamous or notorious, you find out that they had great periods of relapse where they had no trouble at all, but then it would always come back.
Well, you know, the chest hospital in Zarzamora, I mean, when my family moved here in '67, that was still functioning to a certain extent. And then it just became, you know, those little buildings. But,
Thank you for your very.
oh, you're welcome. When I chose this book, I didn't really make the connection to church history. And when I started reading, I thought, I had to stop and take another look at the author. I was aware of the material that he'd written about, the kinds of conflicts and contradictions he's attracted to. But then looking at the idea of a Spanish Protestant is really unique. You know, the country is 800 years under Islam, and then becomes a very Catholic country. And so to have someone who's raised during Franco's period, even if it's at the end, who's also an evangelical Protestant is pretty unique. And then to write in such a very interesting, you know, trying to just read more perspective. I would say also that his translator is particularly gifted. You don't get poetic translation unless you have a really fine translator. And I'm not astute enough at Spanish. His Spanish, as far as I can tell, is really beautiful. But you have a little note on the translator here, and she also has a Spanish Christian publishing background, so it's very interesting who worked on the book as well. It's a good read. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it. In fact, anything Escobar writes sounds pretty interesting, but it will take you to places perhaps more challenging than a lot of other books might. Well, it's probably good for us to be challenged and to make connections between, you know, our education in faith and our commitment and belief. And so, also it's got a really nice cover. You can't really put a face on her. I don't like when they draw a portrait of the character. This is actually much more, it makes me think more, okay, what does she really look like? It doesn't matter. It just matters that she is who she is. I hope you enjoyed that. I do. I love doing this. Because it's not, you know, it's not teacher read. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I don't know how many people actually, when we don't have a face, do we put a face on the people we're reading? I I do. In my mind, I'm seeing a face. I don't know how I make it up, but anyway, I come up with a face sometimes. So thank you very much, Jane. We hope you enjoy the rest of your week of vacation before you're back in school again. We'll look forward to seeing you next year. She's working on it right now. Our meeting next month will be April the 14th, and that's for the women by Kristen Hannah. So by that time, we will have all celebrated not only St. Patrick's Day, but we will have had Easter by then. So I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday, and we'll see you back in April. Thank you.